This book is not a partisan hit piece on Kamala Harris. I'm above that, and that wouldn't have been fun for me to write. It would have been boring. I used her as an example to make three major political points. The first essay, it's an essay in three parts. The first one is about how she is a product of the Berkeley New Left. Her parents attended UC Berkeley. They met at protests. Her father is a Marxist economist, and they were most likely in some kind of communist organization when they met. I'm sure there's an FBI file somewhere that says which communist group they were in, whether it was the Progressive Labor Party or the Socialist Workers Party or one of those groups. We don't know which one in particular, but they met.
Well, you also, while you're on that was my next question, actually. Just not to break your flow, but you talk a lot about the Congress for Cultural Freedom and the influence that it had on the left that she would have grown up in. So can you talk a little about that in the overall context of her upbringing?
Right. Well, McCarthyism, we all know about that. The Communist Party was outlawed and crushed. The Rosenbergs got executed. Pretty awful time. But McCarthyism kind of turned into a vehicle through which a lot of middle class elements were kind of rising up against the American establishment. You know, Joe McCarthy was going after Voice of America, the propaganda outlet, and Radio Free Europe. And Joe McCarthy was accusing the army of being communist. And a lot of middle class kind of people were using the anti-communism to kind of rally against the more liberal elites in the establishment, like the Rockefellers, who had funded, Planned Parenthood and, the work of Alfred Kinsey and others. And so there's this kind of, McCarthyism became this kind of middle class right-wing populist movement. And so that's when, Joe McCarthy, suddenly the media turned on him. He drank himself to death, etc. And then starting from like the late 50s, there was a program. It really escalated. It started earlier, but it really escalated in the late 50s, where the American government was covertly subsidizing and arranging for the Ford Foundation, for the Rockefeller think tanks, and others to subsidize left-wing activism in the United States. I think McGeorge Bundy, who served in the Kennedy administration, and others, there was covert funding for leftist politics. And the main program that carried it out was something called the Congress for Cultural Freedom. And it looked like a nonprofit or whatever, but it was actually set up by the CIA, and it was to promote free thought and independence. And it was funding a lot of people who called themselves communists and socialists, but they were against the Soviet Union. They were against Soviet communism. They were against the old communist parties. And while at the same time they were criticizing the Pentagon and criticizing American consumerism, they were also doing kind of cancel culture against the intellectuals who were loyal to the Soviet Union, were loyal to communism. And they were engaging in this kind of like, you can be on neither side. You can be against the communists and you can be against the American government. And it was actually being paid for by the American government. And the Congress for Cultural Freedom program is where left-wing politics in America started really being reinvented in the lead up to what became the hippie movement of the 60s. Susan Sontag, her essays first appeared in CIA-funded publications like Partisan Review. In addition to that, you had, I talk about Hannah Arendt. She writes this book, Eichmann in Jerusalem, which I read when I was in college, and it's pushed.
Why do you want to make Chris Hedges cry?
What's that?
Why do you want to make Chris Hedges cry?
Oh, well, there you go. But Eichmann in Jerusalem, you read that essay, and it looks like kind of a critique of conformity. But what it's really kind of saying is that deep down, average people are all potential Nazis and need to be controlled, and that Nazism and fascism is just populism, right? And that, and then that matches what Susan Sontag later said. She basically proclaimed communism to be nothing but the most effective form of fascism. And it's this kind of this anti-populism, this narrative of leftism that is not against capitalism. It's not against our economic system. It's against conformity. It's against the military. It's about protecting intellectuals from the vulgar mob that would organize to try and bother them. And the head of the Congress for Cultural Freedom program was Irving Kristol, who later became the father of neoconservatism. So not only did he help reinvent leftist politics, he later, helped reinvent right-wing politics in the 1970s as the kind of the godfather of neoconservatism. His son is Bill Kristol of the Weekly Standard. So politics was being reinvented, and the Bay Area in particular, where Kamala Harris grew up, was kind of ground zero for that. There was also a parallel CIA program going on during these years, which is now public record. It's called Project MK Ultra. And that was where the CIA was trying to develop mind control. And they were going around and getting people on LSD and hallucinogens. There was Operation Midnight Climax in the Bay Area, where they were going around and dropping acid in people's drinks. They were going to brothels and, tying people to beds and putting them on acid to see what would happen. They were doing all kinds of things to do that. And Kamala Harris grew up in leftist politics in San Francisco in the 60s. Which was, yes, a very left-wing environment, but it was left-wing politics that was being remolded by the CIA. And that kind of explains where we're at politically right now, especially in relation to the whole woke thing and what's going on with that. So that's the first essay. Second essay is called Psychology Behind Politics. And that is about Kamala Harris and her personality. And I talk about how the personality of various presidents and leaders lines up and how Kamala Harris is estranged from her father. And there's a parallel life story and a lot of figures you find in a particular wing of American politics associated with the Hillary Clinton State Department, and how that's not generally the kind of psychology that communism and Marxism have tried to appeal to. And the third essay is called The Geopolitical Stage. And that's where I talk about Tulsi Gabbard going after Kamala Harris and Tulsi Gabbard and who she's tied to and how there are divisions there was division within the Obama administration between Hillary Clinton's allies and those that were opposed to what she was doing. And that's why, when John Kerry became Secretary of State in Obama's second term, you'll notice U.S. foreign policy dramatically shifted. During that time. The Hillary Clinton years, the first term of Obama was about spreading chaos and revolution. The second term of Obama, with John Kerry running the State Department, was all about signing deals with countries, establishing relations with Cuba, the Iran nuclear deal, the FARC negotiations in Colombia, etc. And that there are a number of people in the Pentagon who are very afraid of what the results of another Arab Spring would be. And that Kamala Harris has been primed and selected by the people who ran the State Department under Hillary Clinton. And their goal is they want global revolution and chaos to spread what they call the open international system. They want, permanent revolution, I guess you could call it, but, not in the Trotskyite sense, but in the, free market global capitalism sense. And their enemy and their target is what they call populism. And they see Donald Trump as an expression of populism, but also Xi Jinping in China, also Putin in Russia, also, the Iranian government, et cetera. And they see populism as the enemy, and they see globalism and internationalism and mass uprisings fomented by social media as the way to bring it. And I talk about that. And Tulsi Gabbard represents those who are very concerned about that.
Please clap.